They told me it looked like a bunker before they even asked why I'd built it. And I remember standing there in my own backyard thinking, funny, because the only thing I was trying to keep out wasn't people, it was water. The HOA letter showed up 2 days later. Neat little envelope, bold font, like they were announcing a garden party instead of a fine. And by the time I finished reading it, I already knew this wasn't going to be about rules. It was going to be about control. See, my place sat at the lowest bend in the whole neighborhood. Not something you really notice when the sun's out and the grass is green, but when it rains, everything from 3 streets up funnels down like it's got a destination, and that destination is my yard. First year I moved in, it flooded just enough to be annoying. Second year it crept closer to the house, and by the third, I stopped pretending it was bad luck and started treating it like a pattern. My neighbor across the street, Dale, he used to joke about it while walking his dog, said I had lakefront property without the view. And I'd laugh along because what else do you do when something's not serious yet? But I could already feel it turning into something that would be. So I called an engineer, not the kind you find off a quick search. I mean someone who actually came out, walked the slope, took measurements, stood there with his hands on his hips like he was reading the land. And after about 20 minutes he looks at me and says, "You're not imagining it. This whole section drains right through here." And that was the moment it stopped being a concern and became a decision. We drafted plans, real ones, stamped, calculated, the kind that don't leave room for opinions, 12 inches of reinforced concrete, curved structure, anchored deep enough to hold against pressure, not just block water but redirect it, guide it away like you're convincing it to go somewhere else instead of fighting it head-on. It wasn't pretty. I knew that going in, bare concrete, spillways cut into it, a removable gate for overflow control. It looked more like infrastructure than landscaping, but I didn't build it to impress anyone. I built it to work. The permits went through without a problem. County signed off. Everything by the book, which is why I almost laughed when the HOA president, Linda Carver, showed up the morning after it was finished, heels sinking into my lawn like she'd stepped into something she didn't approve of. She didn't even say hello, just held up the paper and goes, "This structure violates community aesthetic guidelines." And I remember wiping my hands on my jeans, looking at her, then at the wall, then back at her, and saying, "It passed county inspection," and she gave me this tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "We're not the county." That right there, that was the line in the sand. The fine started immediately, $300 a day, labeled as non-compliant exterior modification, like I'd painted my house neon green instead of building something to keep it from flooding. Neighbors noticed. Of course they did. You don't pour a wall like that and expect people not to talk. Evening walks turned into little guided tours of my fortress. I'd hear comments drifting over the fence. "Guess he's expecting a war." Or, "Maybe he thinks he's better than the rest of us." And that one stuck with me longer than I'd like to admit, because it wasn't about the wall anymore. It was about perception. Dale even stopped one afternoon, leaned on the fence, shook his head, and said, "Man, you really went all in on this, huh?" Not mean, just skeptical. And I told him, "I'm not trying to be right later. I'm trying not to be wrong when it matters." And he kind of nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't fully buy it. The fines kept stacking, letters kept coming, each one a little more formal than the last, like they were building a case instead of solving a problem, and I made a choice early on. I didn't argue, didn't appeal, didn't show up to meetings to defend myself. I just paid into escrow and waited. Because the thing about water, it doesn't care about opinions, it doesn't negotiate, it just follows gravity, and gravity doesn't need approval from a homeowners association. There was one night, about 2 weeks after the wall went up, I was sitting on the patio, just watching the yard, dry, quiet, nothing happening, and for a second I wondered if maybe I had overdone it. Maybe I let fear push me further than I needed to go. But then I remembered the engineer's voice, calm, certain. "It's not if, it's when." And that stuck with me more than anything else anyone had said. So I kept waiting, not hoping for anything bad to happen, just knowing that eventually, something would test whether I'd made the right call or not. And when it did, there wouldn't be time to explain myself. There wouldn't be a meeting or a vote. There would just be water, moving exactly where it always wanted to go. About 3 weeks after the last notice showed up, the one that said, "Final warning before further action," the sky changed in a way you don't ignore, not dramatic at first, just heavy, like the air itself had weight to it, and by late afternoon the clouds rolled in low and dark enough that it felt like evening came early. I remember standing in the kitchen, looking out past the patio, watching the tree line barely move even though you could tell something was building, and my phone buzzed with a weather alert, one of those long, overly cautious warnings people usually scroll past. But this one mentioned stalled systems, record rainfall potential, flash flood risk. All the words that make you pause just a second longer than usual. Dale texted me not long after, something like, "Looks like you might finally get to use that wall," with a laughing emoji at the end, and I just replied, "Yeah, we'll see," because even then, I wasn't interested in being right. I just wanted the house to stay dry. The rain started steady, not aggressive, just consistent, like it had all the time in the world, and that's the kind that does damage, not the loud storms that come and go, but the ones that settle in and refuse to leave. By 9 p.m., the gutters were already running full. By 10 you could hear water pooling in the street, that low, constant sound of movement, like something gathering strength. I stepped out onto the covered patio, leaned against the post, and just watched, same way I had a dozen times before, except this time there was a quiet tension in it, like waiting for a test you already know you studied for, but still aren't entirely sure about. Around midnight, things shifted. You could see it first in the way the streets started to disappear under the water, not all at once, but inch by inch, the curb line fading until it was just a suggestion. The drains couldn't keep up, you could hear them gurgling, backing up, and that's when I felt that familiar knot in my chest, the one I'd felt the year before when the water crept a little too close to the foundation. Except this time, I didn't move. I didn't start stacking towels, or checking the basement, or pacing around trying to stay ahead of it. I just stood there and watched. By 1:30 in the morning, the flow started coming downhill, not random, not chaotic, exactly the way the engineer had traced it with his boot in the dirt weeks earlier. It came from the upper street first, then picked up volume from the side road, and by the time it reached the bend, it was moving fast enough to carry debris, leaves, trash bins tipped over somewhere uphill, all of it funneling straight toward my yard. That's the moment everything narrowed, like the whole world reduced down to one question: did I get this right? Or didn't I? The first wave hit the wall harder than I expected, not explosive, but forceful, a solid, heavy push of water slamming into the curved concrete, and for a split second, nothing happened. Just impact. Then, almost cleanly, like it had been rehearsed, the water split. You could actually see it, the way it redirected along the curve, peeling off to both sides, flowing toward the easement channel, just like the plans showed. No overflow, no pooling against the base, just movement, controlled, guided, steady. I remember letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and then I just stood there, watching it happen again, and again, and again, each surge hitting, dividing, moving on. Inside the house, everything stayed quiet. No sump pump kicking on, no alarms, no damp smell creeping in from the basement. Just rain on the roof and water moving where it was supposed to go. I made some coffee around 3 a.m., not because I needed it, but because I couldn't sleep even if I tried, and I sat there by the window, cup in my hands, watching hours of work, planning, and a little bit of stubbornness play out in real time. Across the street, it was a different story. At first it was subtle, water creeping up driveways, pooling near garage doors, but then it crossed that invisible line, the one where it stops being manageable and starts becoming damage. I saw Dale come out in a rain jacket, standing in his driveway with his hands on his head, looking down at the water pushing under his garage door like it had decided that's where it belonged now. He looked over at my place at one point, not long, just a glance, and even from that distance, I could tell he understood. By sunrise, the storm hadn't really stopped, but the worst of it had already passed through. The light came in gray and flat, the kind that makes everything look a little more honest than it did the night before. I walked out into the yard, shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass, and took a look around. My lawn was soaked, sure, but intact, no erosion, no standing water, no damage to the foundation. The wall looked exactly the same as it had the day it was poured, quiet, solid, like it had nothing to prove. Then I turned around and looked at the street. Garages were open, not by choice, but because people were trying to salvage what they could. Water lines marked the sides of houses like someone had drawn a line with mud 4 feet up the wall. Furniture sat out on the curb, dripping, ruined. You could hear generators humming, people talking over each other, insurance numbers being exchanged like it was some kind of routine, except it wasn't. It was the kind of morning you don't forget, because it shows you exactly how unprepared you were. Linda's house was hit harder than most. Four-car garage, all of it flooded, boxes floating, storage bins tipped over, things she probably hadn't thought about in years suddenly becoming important because they were being lost. She stood in the driveway in boots, directing someone, clipboard still in hand like she could organize her way out of it. And when she saw me, she paused. Just for a second. No wave, no comment. Just recognition. By mid-morning, the insurance adjusters started arriving, followed by county inspectors, walking through the neighborhood, taking notes, measuring, documenting. One of them made his way over to my yard, looked at the wall, ran his hand along the concrete like he was checking something, and asked, "Who designed this?" I told him, showed him the plans, the calculations, everything we had put together, and he nodded slowly, then said, almost under his breath, "This should have been done across the whole subdivision years ago." Not loud enough for a crowd, just enough for it to land where it needed to. That was the first time I felt it. Not satisfaction exactly, not even relief, just a quiet shift in the air, like the story people had been telling about that wall was starting to change, and not because I said anything, but because reality did it for me. The neighborhood didn't go back to normal after that. Not right away. Maybe not ever in the way it used to be. Because once you've seen water climb 4 feet up your drywall, once you've watched things you thought were permanent just float, something shifts in how you look at everything. For the first couple days, it was all noise, pumps running, contractors coming in and out, people talking in tight voices, comparing damage like it was some kind of scale nobody wanted to win. I kept mostly to myself, not out of distance, just there wasn't much to say that wouldn't sound like I was making a point, and I didn't need to make one. The wall had already done that. Dale came by on the third morning, no dog this time. Just him, standing at the edge of my yard with his hands in his pockets, looking at the concrete like he was trying to understand something he'd missed before. He didn't joke, didn't ease into it, just said, "I owe you an apology," and I shook my head a little, told him it wasn't about that. But he kept going anyway, said, "I thought you were overreacting. Turns out you were just paying attention." That stuck with me more than anything else anyone said that week, because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't defensive, it was honest. We stood there for a minute without talking, just looking at the curve of the wall, the same one everyone had laughed at not too long ago. And before he left, he asked, "You think something like that would work on my side?" And I told him, "Yeah, if it's done right." And that was the first conversation that felt like things were actually changing. Linda didn't come over right away. She kept her distance, busy with claims and repairs. But about a week later, there was a notice posted about an emergency HOA meeting. Attendance strongly encouraged. Same formal tone as always, but there was something underneath it this time. Urgency, maybe even a little humility, though they'd never call it that. I went, not because I had anything to argue anymore, but because I wanted to hear how they were going to talk about it now. The room felt different the second I walked in. Conversations stopped a little quicker, people glanced over a little longer, not hostile, not exactly friendly either, just aware. Linda stood at the front with a stack of papers, but the clipboard was gone, replaced with something that looked less like authority and more like responsibility. She started the meeting the same way she always did, calling it to order, thanking everyone for coming. But then she paused, just for a second, and said, "What happened last week exposed a vulnerability in our community that we can't ignore." No mention of aesthetics, no talk about uniformity, just vulnerability. They went through the damage reports, numbers that sounded almost unreal when you added them up, then the county recommendations, and eventually, they got to my wall. Not by name at first, just a privately constructed flood mitigation structure that performed effectively under stress conditions, which almost made me smile, the way they dressed it up in language. But then Linda looked up, found me in the room, and said, a little more directly, the design in question demonstrated a level of foresight that we, as a board, did not fully appreciate at the time. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was close enough that people understood what she meant. One of the board members asked if I'd be willing to share the plans, maybe consult with other homeowners who were interested, and I told them I wasn't an engineer, just someone who hired one, but yeah, I'd share whatever I had. And then came the part nobody would have predicted a month earlier. They voted. Unanimous, no objections, to amend the design guidelines, to allow protective flood structures, specifically reinforced concrete retaining walls with proper drainage features. And they didn't just allow them. They referenced mine as the example. Walking out of that meeting, I didn't feel vindicated the way people might expect. There was no moment where I thought, I told you so. No sense of winning anything. Because looking around at the people leaving that room, the ones dealing with repairs, insurance battles, things lost that wouldn't be replaced the same way, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a correction, one that came a little too late for some of them. Over the next couple weeks, things started to rebuild, slowly, methodically. Contractors became a constant presence, the sound of saws and generators replacing the usual quiet of the neighborhood. And then, almost without anyone announcing it, you started to see it. New walls going up. Not all at once, not identical, but similar in purpose, curved lines, reinforced bases, drainage channels built in from the start. What used to stand out suddenly didn't anymore. My eyesore became just another part of the landscape, except now it had context. Dale's was one of the first. He had an engineer out within days, didn't cut corners, didn't try to simplify it, just did it right. One afternoon he called me over, stood next to the formwork before they poured, and said, "Never thought I'd be copying your homework." And I told him, better late than flooded. And that was about as close to humor as either of us got about it. Linda's situation was different. She didn't rebuild right away, took longer, had more damage to deal with. But when she finally did, she didn't hide the changes. Her wall was even more pronounced than mine, higher in some sections, with reinforced spillways that made it clear she wasn't taking chances again. The day it was finished, she was out front when I got home, and for a second I thought she might say something, maybe revisit the whole thing, but instead she just nodded once, a small, almost reluctant acknowledgement, and said, "It's effective," and I nodded back, because that was enough. Every now and then, when it rains now, not even heavy storms, just regular rain, I'll step out onto the patio and watch the water move, same as I did before, except now it's not just mine you can see working. The whole neighborhood has changed its relationship with it. There's less denial, less assumption that things will just be fine because they always have been. People pay attention now. And here's the part one keep coming back to. None of this started because I wanted to go against anyone, or prove something, or stand out. It started because I saw a pattern and decided to act on it before it got worse. But somewhere along the way, that decision turned into a conflict, not because it was wrong, but because it didn't fit what people expected things to look like. And that makes me wonder how many other problems get ignored just because the solution isn't pretty. I still have those violation letters, by the way. Never threw them out. They're sitting in a folder in the garage, not as a reminder of being right, but as a reminder of how easy it is for people to mistake appearance for impact. Because if that storm had missed us, if the rain had gone somewhere else, I probably would have ended up tearing that wall down just to stop the fines, and everyone would have felt justified about it. So now I'm curious what you think. If you were in that neighborhood before the storm, would you have sided with the HOA, keeping things uniform, predictable, maybe even a little safer in a different way? Or would you have backed the one person building something that looked out of place, but solved a problem nobody else wanted to deal with yet? And more importantly, how many times do we shut down the right idea just because it doesn't look the way we're used to? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear where you land on that.